When buying a house in Australia, you absolutely have to use a mortgage because if you use it correctly, your returns can be magnified fivefold. Why would you turn down free gold? As long as you're in Australia and might buy a house in the future, give me 3 minutes of your time. If you can understand what I'm about to say, you'll truly gain a valuable insight. There are mainly 2 benefits to getting a mortgage when buying a house in Australia. First, it can multiply your returns several times over. Second, there are some additional tax advantages, and today the example we are using is actually a real case from one of my clients, so everything I'm saying is real and can stand up to scrutiny. Alright, so the first point about mortgages is what's called 5 times leverage. What does 5 times leverage mean? It's normal if you don't understand right away, don't worry. When buying a house in Australia, for most people, the minimum down payment is 20%. For certain professions, the down payment can be even lower. You can check my previous videos where I've explained this. A 20% down payment means 5 times leverage. For example, take our client's house. We bought it for 1.2 million, and in just half a year, it has already appreciated by 80,000. So, conservatively estimating, by the end of the year, it could appreciate to 1.3 million. After we settled on this house, we also did some renovations, so the rent is quite impressive. It reached $1,300 per week. We'll talk more about the rental income when we get to the tax section later. For now, let's focus on the appreciation part. So if a 1.2 million house increases to 1.3 million, many people think that means you've made a profit of 100,000, right? But that's actually a rather basic way of looking at it. Let's look at it from another perspective. When he bought this house, excluding stamp duty for now, the down payment was actually just 20% because this client really did take out an 80% mortgage. There are 2 ways to do this. He could also settle in cash, but we don't recommend that, and I'll explain why in a moment. Since he only put down a 20% down payment when he bought this 1.2 million house, again, not counting stamp duty, he actually only paid 240,000 Australian dollars. Then, when the house appreciated by 100,000, it means he invested 240,000, and after a year, he gained 100,000 in value. In other words, he put in 240,000. So with a total outlay of 340,000, the annualized return on investment is actually 41%. Honestly, at this point in the video, I'm not even sure if I should post this. If you tell people you're getting a 41% return, they'll think you're taking out high interest loans or doing peer-to-peer lending, but even those don't offer this kind of return. This is one of our core beliefs. Why invest in real estate? Because it really is low risk and high return. But let's get back to the main topic. If this video does get posted and you're able to watch it, then actually, this person has another option, which is the more conventional one that we Chinese people tend to prefer, buying a house with all cash. So today with 1.2 million, I won't take out a loan. I'd just pay all cash up front and buy the house. So what would happen in this case? The property would still appreciate by 100,000, but this 100,000 is earned from an investment of 1.2 million Australian dollars. So it's not quite as attractive, though still pretty good. In other words, this 100,000 in appreciation comes from putting in 1.2 million, which means the annualized return is 8.3%, just a little bit better than putting your money in the bank. Now, this also involves rental income. If you have to pay out of pocket to maintain this property, I think you shouldn't buy it because your return will be further reduced. In that case, just putting your money in the bank would be simpler, less hassle, and you'd probably make about the same. So in this context, it makes sense. Why does taking out a loan multiply your returns by 5 times? It's because you're using financial leverage. For example, this client is using 240,000 Australian dollars. And with that, he was able to leverage a $100,000 gain. This is the first advantage of taking out a loan, which is the addictive power of leverage. Borrowing 20% gives you 5 times the leverage. But that's not all. We've just talked about the first advantage, and there's a second one, which is related to taxes. Taxes in Australia can be quite daunting, but if you know how to use them to your advantage, you can have your cake and eat it too. Personally, I like to pursue both, because only by doing so can you make even more money. Alright, let's continue. For this person, with a $1.2 million property, right? In Australia, it's normal to put down a 20% deposit and borrow 80%. And let's say he's only paying interest, just to make today's calculations easier. With a 6% interest rate, that means he borrowed $960,000, which is 80% of the property price. Then for the interest, he has to pay interest on this amount every year. This is where the rental income comes into play, because the rent he gets is very high. He made some renovations, which is also our usual practice. He rented it out for $1,300 per week, which means his rental income, oh, I drew this part wrong. No worries, this should actually go right here. Now, regarding this rental income, let's set aside whether you have loan interest costs for now. Your gross income on paper is extremely high, astonishingly high. The property appreciates by 100,000 a year, that's one thing. Your property will also generate a strong cash flow of 67,000 Australian dollars. Now, let's say you don't have a job at all. This 67,000 comes in, but in turn, you still have to pay 20,000 Australian dollars in taxes to the ATO each year. So why do you need to take out a loan? That's where the advantage comes in. Where does this advantage show? As long as you have a mortgage on this property. Didn't we just mention there's also interest expenses? At this point, you can do your accounting. Why is that? Oh, and I just forgot to mention, the maintenance costs for a house in Australia are very high, at least 5,000 Australian dollars a year. This further proves that the rent must be high enough to make this work. Otherwise, just putting your money in the bank instead of buying a house really isn't worth it. After deducting fixed holding costs like landlord insurance, annual water fees, and maintenance fees, your rental income is about 62,000 Australian dollars. That 62,000 doesn't change the fact you still have to pay a lot of taxes. If the property is mortgaged, remember there's also 57,000 in interest. So if you subtract the 57,000 in interest, by the way, I wrote it wrong here, it's not 10,000, it's actually 50,000. So what this means is, aside from the capital appreciation, if you bought the property outright with full payment, you would still have to pay an additional 20,000 Australian dollars in taxes every year. But if you bought it with a loan and used the interest to offset your income, you actually don't have to pay taxes every year. Why? Because the tax threshold in Australia is still 18,000. That means if your total income this year, after all calculations, is only 5,000, you don't need to pay any tax at all. I always speak the truth and only do real things in my business. But when it comes to making money in real estate,